The Duetto Spider project is nearing the end, but there are still a couple of things left on the snag list, one of them being the fuel level sender unit. The car currently has a new replacement unit, but I think it's for a different brand of gauge, so it's not reading properly, and it's left me stranded a couple of times. So I'm going to rebuild the original unit that I removed from the Duetto years ago. The problem is that it's seized with rust and not working at all. So first things first, I need to get this apart. I'll start by removing the rivets that connect the input wires. This whole unit essentially acts as an electrical earth for the gauge on the dashboard. These two wires are for the fuel level and the low level warning light. The bare brass strip is the wire for the level, and the black plastic coated strip is the wire for the warning light. Now with those strips, or wires, disconnected, I can pry open the folded over tabs that hold the plastic body of the sender unit in place. And inside the unit you can see lots of rust. The pivoting arm within the unit needs to make a good electrical connection with the body of the unit, so all this rust is no help. This is the input for the low fuel level warning light. The internal pivoting arm, which is also the brush for both the level and warning light circuits, is attached to the float lever arm at the rear of the plastic housing. Once this is disconnected, the lever arm can be removed, followed by the resistance coil and the input wire for the fuel level circuit. Here's the core of the trouble with this unit. The float lever arm is stuck in place. It should move freely, but this is totally seized. With a little penetrating oil and some brute force, the rust gives way and the lever arm can be removed. Here you can see just how much rust had built up inside the unit. All the electrical components are in pretty good shape, but the body of this unit needs a lot of work. I let the body soak in some acid for a few hours to dissolve the rust, before running it through the bead blasting cabinet in preparation for electroplating. And here it is, freshly plated, along with the float lever arm and a bead blasted plastic housing. Here you can see the tabs that hold the plastic housing to the metal body of the unit. This is the resistance coil for the fuel level gauge. Where the wire is tightly wound, it creates high resistance, and where the coil is loose, it has very little resistance. The wire in this coil is in great shape. The fuel level contact brush on the pivoting arm is worn on the end, and it's formed a sharp point that is scratching against the coil. So I'll bend the end of the brush over, so it creates a smooth contact point. The level will read a little lower than it is, but not by much. But at least it won't get caught in the coil or damage the wire. There is a little brass contact point on the body. This needs to be pretty clean because it's the point where the pivoting arm grounds to the metal body. If this is not making good contact, the gauge will read empty all the time and the low level warning light won't work. Now that I'm happy that everything is clean, this can go back together. Here's that input for the warning light. Here you can see that the contact brush isn't making contact with the input. So I'll remove the input and bend it just a little bit. Now that brush is making solid contact when the float level is low. Perfect. To fit the input wire for the fuel level circuit, I need to remove that coil again. The input wire is pinned between the plastic housing and the low resistance side of the coil, making constant contact. With everything in place, I can now show how the whole unit works. On the fuel level circuit, the current runs along the input wire into the low resistance side of the coil and along the coil to the contact brush and then to the earthing point on the metal body. If the tank is empty, the brush sits on the higher resistance side of the coil, giving a low reading. If the tank is full, the brush sits on the low resistance side of the coil and the gauge will have a strong earth and read full. On the warning light circuit, the current runs along the input wire, and when the tank is almost empty, the contact brush comes into contact with the input wire, completing the circuit and turning on the light on the dashboard. I've reattached the float lever arm, meaning that the pivoting arm is in for good, and I can install the plastic housing back onto the metal body. It's very important that these input wires remain isolated from the metal body. If there's any electrical connection where they pass through the metal body, the gauge will always read full and the warning light will always be on. Now that it's all wired up, I can test this unit. I'm just using a 12-volt battery and a test light to check things over first. First up is the low-level warning light. And now the fuel level circuit. It all seems to be working well, so now I'll try it out in the car. And it works. The reading on the gauge seems to be pretty accurate. Well, at least it should be much more accurate than the current sender unit, so I'll swap them over. I'm going to call this an episode. The Duetto is one step closer to being completed. It won't be long until it's done now. Here are a few more videos about the rebuild of this car. It sure has been a long journey. But the end is in sight, and there will be a new project car on the channel pretty soon, so stick around for that. Before I go, I want to say thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon. It's a big help and allows me to spend time making these videos. The support has been great. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.